The plastic chair pressed against my hip in all the wrong places, and the fluorescent lights made everything look sickly green. 3 hours. That's how long I'd been sitting in this emergency room waiting area, watching people come and go while my chest pain stabbed at me like a persistent reminder that 72 isn't young anymore. "Mom will be right back," Thomas had said, his arm around Jessica's waist. "Just going to move the car to a better spot. The meter's about to expire." That was 3 hours ago. I kept checking my phone, willing it to buzz with an explanation. A text. Anything. The pain in my chest had dulled to a manageable ache, but the knot in my stomach grew tighter with each passing minute. Around me, families clustered together, taking turns holding vigil. A young mother paced with her feverish toddler. An elderly man held his wife's hand while she dozed in her wheelchair. And I sat alone. It wasn't supposed to be like this. For the past 5 years since Jessica married my son, I'd tried so hard to be the mother-in-law I wished I'd had. When they couldn't afford the down payment on their house, I wrote the check without hesitation. $25,000 from the nest egg Harold and I had built together. When little Emma was born, I showed up with casseroles and baby clothes, taking night shifts so they could sleep. I babysat every weekend, bought school supplies, paid for soccer cleats and piano lessons. "You're too generous, Margaret," Harold used to say when he was still alive. "Save some for yourself." But generosity felt like love, and after losing Harold, love felt scarce. Jessica had always been polite to my face, the kind of politeness that keeps you at arm's length. She'd accept my help with a tight smile, never quite meeting my eyes. "Thank you, Margaret," she'd say, her voice flat as cardboard. Never mom like I'd hoped. Never warm. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way she'd glance at her phone when I was talking. How she'd find excuses to leave the room when I visited. The subtle eye rolls she thought I didn't catch when I offered to help with Emma's homework or suggested family traditions. But I kept trying. Kept giving. Kept showing up. The triage nurse called my name finally, and I shuffled forward, glancing back at the entrance one more time. Maybe they'd gotten into an accident. Maybe their phone died. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation for why my son would leave his mother alone in an emergency room. "Are you here by yourself, hon?" the nurse asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She squeezed my shoulder. "Let's get you taken care of." As she led me back to an examination room, I caught a glimpse of the parking lot through a window. Their blue Honda was gone. Not moved to a better spot. Gone. That night, after the doctor confirmed it was just stress and exhaustion, after I'd called a taxi to take me home, after I'd climbed into my empty house and sat on my couch in the dark, I realized something that cut deeper than any chest pain. I was disposable to the woman I once treated like a daughter. The taxi driver had looked at me with pity when he dropped me off. An old woman in a hospital gown and cardigan, fumbling for cash with shaking hands. Mrs. Henderson from next door was getting her mail when I walked up my driveway. "Margaret? What happened? Where's Thomas?" I couldn't find the words. How do you explain that your own son drove away and left you? That the daughter-in-law you've poured your heart and money into couldn't be bothered to wait 3 hours? "Just a false alarm," I managed. "Everything's fine." But Mrs. Henderson's expression told me she didn't buy it. She watched me unlock my door with concern creasing her forehead. Thomas called the next morning, his voice casual as if nothing had happened. "Hey Mom, how are you feeling? Sorry we had to leave last night. Jessica got a migraine and needed to get home to Emma. We figured you were in good hands with the doctors." A migraine. That was the excuse. "I waited 3 hours for you to come back," I said. "What? Oh Mom, we thought you knew we were leaving. Jessica was really sick. You understand." No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how a migraine prevented a phone call. How being sick meant abandoning someone who'd given you everything. How we figured became an acceptable substitute for basic human decency. I had to take a taxi home. Well, that worked out then. Everything was fine. Everything was fine. Those words echoed in my head for days. I started remembering other moments with fresh eyes. The Christmas gifts I'd carefully chosen and wrapped, opened with forced smiles and quickly set aside. The birthday dinner I'd hosted last year where Jessica spent the entire time texting. The family photos where she stood just far enough away to make it clear she didn't belong to us. The thank you cards I never received for the piano lessons. The hugs that felt like duty. The way she'd brighten when talking to her own mother on the phone, laughing and animated in a way she never was with me. I'd mistaken politeness for acceptance. Tolerance for love. 3 weeks later, Thomas called asking if I could watch Emma for the weekend. They wanted to go to Napa for their anniversary. I can't, I said. The lie came surprisingly easy. What? Why not? You love having Emma. I did love having Emma. But I loved myself enough now to recognize when I was being used. I have plans. It was the first time in 5 years I'd said no to them. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Oh. Well, maybe next time. But there wouldn't be a next time. Not like before. I was done being the convenient grandmother, the emergency babysitter, the endless source of financial support. I was done pretending that giving everything I had would somehow earn me the love I'd been desperately seeking. That weekend, instead of watching Emma, I went to see a movie by myself. Bought popcorn and a soda and sat in the middle of the theater, surrounded by strangers who didn't expect anything from me. It was the first time in months I'd felt truly peaceful. 6 months passed in blissful quiet. I started a small garden, joined a book club at the library, and began volunteering at the animal shelter. My days felt lighter without the constant weight of trying to earn affection that would never come. Thomas called occasionally, his voice carrying an edge of confusion when I declined invitations or kept conversations brief. Jessica never called at all, which was somehow more honest than the years of forced pleasantries. Then my phone rang at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. Thomas's name flashed on the screen, and something in my gut told me this wasn't a social call. Mom. His voice cracked like he was 16 again. I need to talk to you. Can we come over? They arrived within an hour, Jessica clutching a folder of papers, her usual composed mask replaced by something approaching panic. Thomas paced my living room while she sat stiffly on the edge of my couch. The same couch where I'd spent countless evenings babysitting Emma. We're in trouble, Mom, Thomas said, running his hands through his hair. Real trouble. Jessica finally spoke, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I made some bad investments. With our savings. And I borrowed against the house. The story came out in fits and starts. Jessica had been day trading behind Thomas's back, convinced she could make them rich quick. She'd lost their emergency fund, their vacation money, and somehow managed to put their home at risk. Now they had 30 days to come up with $40,000 or face foreclosure. We don't know what else to do, Thomas said, looking at me with desperate eyes. The bank won't extend the loan. We've already borrowed from Jessica's parents. I sat quietly watching them both squirm in my silence. This was the longest conversation Jessica had ever initiated with me, and it was because she needed something. I know I haven't been the best daughter-in-law, Jessica said, tears starting to fall. But Emma needs stability. She needs her home. There was the child card. The one thing they knew would pierce whatever armor I'd built around my heart. Please, Mom, Thomas added. I wouldn't ask if we had any other choice. I looked at them both, really looked. Thomas shifting his weight from foot to foot like a guilty child. Jessica finally showing genuine emotion, but only because she needed my money. They'd come to me polite and desperate, suddenly remembering I existed because their backs were against the wall. 6 months ago I would have written the check immediately. Would have felt grateful they trusted me enough to ask for help. Would have convinced myself this crisis would bring us closer together. But 6 months ago, I hadn't spent a night alone in an emergency room. Let me think about it, I said. The relief on their faces was immediate and presumptuous. They thought they had me. They thought the old Margaret would kick in, the one who couldn't bear to see them struggle. They thought I was weak, but I was just watching. I made them wait 2 weeks for my answer. 2 weeks during which Thomas called daily, his voice increasingly strained. 2 weeks during which Jessica sent carefully crafted text messages that walked the line between gratitude and pressure. When I finally agreed to meet them, I chose a neutral location, the conference room at my financial advisor's office. I wanted witnesses. I wanted documentation. And I wanted them to understand this wasn't a family favor anymore. Robert Clemens had been handling my finances since Harold died. He was younger than my son, but he had the kind of steady presence that made me feel protected rather than patronized. When I'd called to set up this meeting, I'd been honest about my intentions. Thomas and Jessica arrived 10 minutes late, Jessica's heels clicking nervously against the marble floor as Robert led us into his office. They sat across from me at the polished conference table, and for the first time in our relationship, I held all the power. "Before we discuss any financial arrangement," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to understand something. That night in the emergency room, why didn't you come back?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort across their faces. Thomas shifted in his chair. Jessica stared at her hands. "Mom," we explained. "No," I interrupted. "You gave me an excuse. I want the truth." The silence stretched until Jessica finally looked up, her eyes darting between Thomas and me. I didn't think you needed us there. You're so independent, so strong. We thought you'd be fine on your own." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. But underneath it I heard something else. The dismissal I'd been sensing for years finally spoken aloud. They'd left because they could. Because they'd calculated that I'd forgive them. Because my love had become a given, something they could spend without earning. "I see," I said. "And now you need me to be strong enough to save your house." Thomas flinched. "That's not. Mom, we love you. This isn't about using you." "Then what is it about?" "It's about family," Jessica said, finding her voice. "It's about helping each other when things get hard." I opened the folder Robert had prepared for me. Inside were documents I'd never thought I'd need. Legal papers that would protect me from the people I'd once protected unconditionally. "You're right," I said. "It is about family. That's why I'm not giving you the money." The color drained from their faces. "I'm lending it to you. At market rate interest. With Emma's college fund as collateral. And if you default, that money goes directly into a trust for Emma's education. Money you can't touch, can't borrow against, can't spend on anything but her future." "Mom, that's..." Thomas started. "Fair," I finished. "That's fair. That's what someone would offer a stranger who'd abandoned them in an emergency room." Jessica's composure finally cracked. "We made a mistake, okay? We're sorry. But you're our family. Families forgive each other. Families also show up for each other," I said, signing the papers Robert slid across the table. "And families say thank you. And families don't disappear when their presence is needed most." I stood up, gathering my purse while they sat frozen in their chairs. "Robert will handle the details. You'll get your money, your house will be safe, and Emma will have her college education secured. But going forward, our relationship is going to look very different." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "And Jessica? Next time you have a migraine, try some aspirin instead of abandoning family members at the hospital." The elevator doors closed on their stunned faces and I finally allowed myself to smile. The check cleared 3 days later. Thomas called to thank me, his voice hollow with the kind of gratitude that comes with strings attached. Jessica sent a text, brief, formal, and somehow managing to sound resentful even while expressing appreciation. I didn't care anymore. Instead of dwelling on their reaction, I threw myself into the life I'd been building in the margins. The animal shelter promoted me to volunteer coordinator. The book club elected me president. Mrs. Henderson and I started taking morning walks together, and she introduced me to her sister's book circle. Emma called me on her birthday, her 8-year-old voice bright and chattering about school and friends and the new bike she'd gotten. She didn't mention her parents' financial troubles, and I didn't ask. Children shouldn't carry the weight of adult failures. Grandma Maggie, can you come to my soccer game Saturday? I wouldn't miss it, I said and meant it. At the game, I sat in the bleachers with the other grandparents, cheering when Emma scored and commiserating when the referee made a questionable call. Thomas and Jessica sat 3 rows down, glancing back at me occasionally with expressions I couldn't quite read. Guilt maybe. Or relief that I was still showing up for their daughter even if our relationship had fundamentally changed. After the game, Emma ran up to me with grass stains on her knees and victory in her eyes. Did you see my goal, Grandma? I saw everything, I said, hugging her tight. You were magnificent. Thomas approached us cautiously. Mom, do you want to come to dinner? We're going to that pizza place Emma likes. It was an olive branch, or maybe just another performance for Emma's benefit. Either way, I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine. Thank you, but I have plans, I said, which was true. I was meeting my book club friends for coffee to discuss our next selection. Emma's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly. Can I visit you next weekend? You promised to teach me how to make cookies. Of course, sweetheart. Just you and me. As I walked to my car, I heard Jessica say something sharp to Thomas, too quiet for me to catch the words but loud enough to convey irritation. They were still processing the new dynamic, still expecting me to slip back into my old role as the accommodating matriarch who asked for nothing and gave everything. But that woman had died in an emergency room waiting area, abandoned with her chest pains and her misplaced trust. 6 months later, I received a formal invitation in the mail, embossed cardstock announcing Jessica's promotion at work. At the bottom, someone had handwritten, "Thank you for believing in us." The handwriting was Thomas's, but I knew whose idea the card had been. Jessica was trying in her limited way to rebuild what she'd torn down. I sent a congratulations card back. Nothing more, nothing less. These days my calendar stays full without their emergencies filling the gaps. I've started dating a man from my book club. A widower named Frank who brings me flowers and opens doors and never once assumes I'll be available at his convenience. He makes me laugh, and when I told him about the hospital incident he held my hand and said, "Their loss." Last week, Emma called to tell me she'd been accepted into the gifted program at school. Her voice bubbled with excitement as she described the advanced classes she'd take, the science projects she'd complete, the college preparatory track she was now on. This means I can go to any college I want, right, Grandma? Even the expensive ones. Yes, sweetheart, I said, thinking about the trust fund that would ensure her dreams didn't depend on her parents' financial decisions. Any college you want. After we hung up, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the tomatoes I'd planted grow heavy on their vines. The evening air was warm, and Mrs. Henderson waved from her porch where she was reading a novel from our shared book list. This was what family felt like. Not the desperate transactions I'd mistaken for love, but the quiet presence of people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they needed something. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank, asking if I wanted to catch the early movie tomorrow. I typed back yes, then set the phone aside and watched the sun set over the life I'd built from the ashes of my old generosity. Family isn't who you raise, it's who stays when you're left behind. And sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose for yourself.